Abram and his household left Egypt behind. The land of Pharaoh's wealth and Sarah's near abduction faded into the dust behind their caravan. Abram left the familiar for the unknown. They returned to Canaan, the land God had promised, a land of hills and altars, of sacred echoes and silent soil. But the promise had not yet bloomed. No child, no heir, no visible fulfillment of the covenant that once lit the night sky with stars. And so, they returned not in triumph, but in tension. Did Abram ever wonder if he misunderstood God's timeline? What does faith look like when the promise feels forgotten? And why do we, as humans, believe that God needs our help to fulfill his promises? Together, we'll examine these questions and witness the faithfulness of God unfold in ways no human hand could orchestrate. The tents were pitched, the flocks grazed, the altars stood, but the womb remained closed. Sarai aged in silence. Abram aged in obedience. Was the delay divine? Or had they missed something? This is where the story deepens. Not in miracles, but in waiting. Not in thunder, but in whispers. So, she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram agreed to what Sarai said. Genesis 16:2. And so, Ishmael is conceived not by divine miracle, but by human means. But heaven is not silent. The story is about to shift from longing to legacy, from compromise to covenant. And every step, every sigh, every choice will echo through generations. Sometimes we mistake delay for denial. Sometimes we confuse silence with abandonment. Sometimes we believe that if we don't move, the promise won't either. But God's promises are not powered by our plans. They are rooted in his character, not our calendar. Still, we reach like Sarai offering Hagar, like Abram consenting because we fear that faith without action is foolishness. But sometimes, faith is the action. Faith is the waiting. Faith is the stillness that trusts the unseen. Hagar, once a servant, now carried the child of the patriarch, but instead of honor, she received scorn. Sarai's eyes burned with jealousy. Her words cut like desert thorns. The household, once sacred, became suffocating. So Hagar fled. She didn't pack provisions. She didn't ask permission. She ran pregnant, alone, into the wilderness, into the silence, into the unknown. The desert swallowed her. Dust clung to her feet. Her breath grew shallow. Her hope thinned like the horizon. She reached a spring near Shur, collapsing beside the water, unseen by men, but not by heaven. And then, the angel of the Lord appeared, not in thunder, not in flame, but in quiet compassion. And he said, "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?" Genesis 16:8. He called her by name. He acknowledged her pain. He gave her a promise. "You are pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery." Ishmael, which means God hears. This wasn't just a name, it was a declaration. A reminder that even in exile, even in suffering, God hears. He hears the cries of the castaway, the prayers of the overlooked, the silence of the brokenhearted. And Hagar, the castaway, became the first person in Scripture to name God. "You are El Roi," she said, "the God who sees me." So she returned not because the pain had vanished, but because the promise had spoken. She was no longer invisible. She was chosen, seen, heard. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Genesis 16:15. The desert was still, the sky vast and silent. Abram stood before God not as a wanderer, but as a chosen vessel. He was 99 years old, weathered by time, shaped by obedience, yet still waiting for the promise to take flesh. And then God spoke. I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. I will make my covenant between me and you, and will greatly increase your numbers. This was not a renewal, it was a deepening. Abram was renamed Abraham, father of many, though he had only one son, born of compromise. Sarai became Sarah princess, though she had never cradled a child of her own. And then came the sign, not a monument, not a scroll, but a mark upon the body. Every male among you shall be circumcised. It will be the sign of the covenant between me and you. A cutting, a consecration, flesh marked by faith. It was intimate, painful, permanent. Abraham obeyed that very day, he and every male in his household, from the eldest servant to the newborn slave. Even Ishmael, 13 years old, was circumcised. The covenant was no longer just spoken, it was engraved. This was the moment when faith became flesh, when the unseen promise left a visible scar, when obedience meant surrendering even the most private places to divine ownership. God also informed Abraham that through Sarah, the promise will come. But Abraham loved Ishmael. He had raised him. He had hoped through him. Abraham's heart must have trembled. He had already made peace with the idea that Ishmael was the fulfillment. He had even pleaded, "If only Ishmael might live under your blessing." But God was clear. Ishmael would be blessed, he would father 12 rulers, become a great nation. But the covenant, the sacred thread of redemption, would pass through Isaac, the son born not of human strategy, but of divine miracle. Sarah would conceive, the barren would bear, the laughter of disbelief would become the laughter of joy. This was not a rejection of Ishmael, it was a refinement of the promise. Abraham had to hold both truths, the love of a father for his firstborn, and the obedience of a servant to the voice of God. And so, he bowed, circumcised his household, waited for the impossible. Because faith is not just believing in what God can do, it's surrendering to how he chooses to do it. The sun hung heavy over the plains of Mamre. Abraham sat at the entrance of his tent, aged and watchful, the desert wind brushing against his robe. The land was quiet, but his heart was alert, tuned to the rhythm of heaven. Then he saw them. 3 men stood nearby, not travelers, not ordinary guests. Their presence shimmered with something eternal. Abraham ran to meet them, bowed low to the ground, and offered hospitality with urgency and honor. "My Lord, if I have found favor in your eyes, do not pass your servant by." Water was brought, feet were washed, bread was baked, a calf was prepared. Under the shade of the oaks, the divine dined with dust. And then came the question, "Where is your wife Sarah?" Abraham answered, "There, in the tent." Then came the promise, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Genesis 18:10. Inside the tent, Sarah laughed, not with joy but with disbelief. She was old, her womb was silent, her hope had grown brittle. But the visitor heard her laugh, and he asked, "Why did Sarah laugh? Is anything too hard for the Lord?" The moment was sacred, a visitation wrapped in mystery, a prophecy wrapped in grace. Abraham had entertained angels. Sarah had overheard eternity, and the promise long delayed was now set in motion. This is the same God who carved galaxies with his breath, who hung the sun like a lantern and scattered stars like seeds, who shaped man from dust and woman from rib, who split seas, stilled storms, and summoned light from nothing. Can he not speak life into Sarah's womb? Can he not call forth a child from a body long past its prime? Sarah laughed, not because she doubted God's power, but because she had grown used to silence, used to waiting, used to wondering. But God answered her laughter with a question. Is anything too hard for the Lord? The one who commands the cosmos does not forget the tent. The one who governs time does not lose track of tears. And so, he spoke, not just to Abraham, not just to Sarah, but to every heart that has ever waited. At the appointed time, I will return. The meal had ended. The visitors rose. Abraham walked with them, his robe trailing in the dust, his heart stirred by something unspoken. The sun dipped low over the hills of Canaan, casting long shadows toward the valley. And then they looked toward Sodom, a city glittering in the distance, wealthy, proud, corrupt. Its towers caught the light, but its foundations were crumbling beneath the weight of sin. The Lord paused. Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? This was no ordinary walk. It was a moment of divine transparency, a conversation between Creator and covenant bearer. God revealed his plan. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah was great. Their sin, grievous. Judgment was near. But Abraham did not remain silent. He stepped forward not as a spectator, but as an intercessor, remembering his nephew Lot, who lived in Sodom and Gomorrah. Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous? And so began the plea. 50, 45, 40, 30, 20, 10. Each number a heartbeat. Each question a cry for mercy. Abraham stood between heaven and earth, between justice and compassion. He did not plead for Sodom's innocence. He pleaded for its remnant, for the possibility of righteousness, for the hope of redemption. And the Lord listened. Then the angels turned toward the city, and Abraham stood alone, watching the horizon darken. As Abraham waited, the two angels entered the city of Sodom. They came not with swords, but with silence. Not with wrath, but with warning. Lot sat at the city gate, his posture noble, his heart conflicted. He saw them and bowed low, sensing something sacred beneath their human form. He urged them to stay, to rest, to come under his roof. But the city was watching. As night fell, the streets grew restless. Shadows gathered. Men surrounded Lot's house, demanding the strangers be handed over. Their cries were not of welcome, but of wickedness. Lot pleaded, offered peace, even offered his daughters. But the mob surged. Then the angels acted. They struck the men with blindness. They pulled Lot inside, and they spoke with urgency. Do you have anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons, daughters, get them out, for we are about to destroy this place. Before dawn, Lot fled. His wife, his daughters, his heart heavy with loss. The angels led them out, commanding, flee for your life. Do not look back. And then it happened. The sky cracked open. Fire fell like rain. Sulfur poured from heaven. The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, once proud, once prosperous, were reduced to ash. Lot's wife turned, just once. Her eyes lingered on what was, and she became a pillar of salt. Abraham watched from the hills. Smoke rose like a furnace. The valley that once shimmered with wealth now whispered of judgment. This was not vengeance. It was justice, a divine reckoning, a warning etched in flame. Lot's wife turned, not with rebellion, but with reluctance, not with defiance, but with attachment. She looked back on a city that had shaped her days, on routines that felt familiar, on comforts that masked corruption. But God was moving her to a better place, a place of safety, a place of mercy, a place not yet seen, but already spoken. And still, she turned, because sometimes the past feels safer than the unknown. Sometimes bondage feels easier than breakthrough. Sometimes we cling to what God is trying to release. But the call of heaven is forward. The pillar of cloud does not retreat. The voice of promise does not echo backward. Remember Lot's wife. not to condemn her, but to remind us. When God is moving, don't freeze in yesterday's shadow. And the next chapter will not begin with ashes, but with laughter. Is anything too hard for the Lord? That question still echoes, through tents and tears, through wilderness and waiting, through every heart that dares to believe. So stay with the story, because what comes next will change everything.